I know I'm in a simulation. I've known that for a while. But I think what's kind of cool is like this world that I'm in, you know, the game, it's really cool. It's a cool game. It's a cool game I'm in. But like, I very much consider myself the Alexander Hamilton of the United Nations. And what I mean by that is, what Alexander is truly famous for is co-authoring the Federalist Papers with James Madison. And what the Federalist Papers were, is they were essays written basically advocating for the necessity of a stronger U.S. government. Because the U.S., it's not a country, it's a government. If the U.S. government collapses, suddenly we're no longer in USA, we're just an A. That's truly what he's famous for, is writing the Federalist Papers with James Madison, who ironically enough, he was kind of like a traitor to the Federalist Party, because he like glazed Thomas Jefferson to like get his endorsement or something. I don't know. But yeah, like the U.S. government before the Constitution was ratified was a complete joke. It had no authority. It was worthless. No taxes. Like, okay, like how is the government supposed to function? How is it supposed to do anything? We have 1,000 different banks because there's not a centralized bank. And the government can't collect money to do stuff, man. Like we can't do collectivism. We can't do socialism because the government's too fucking weak. And our boy Alexander Hamilton came in and was like, nah, man, I'm gonna fix this shit. And he did. He made he strengthened the United States federal government. And there's you can make a whole like video about the Federalists and the Revolution and everything. But I kind of see that similar to the United Nations. I mean, yeah, like the United Nations exists, but it's such a pathetic government, man. It has no standing army. It has no central bank. It doesn't have a Supreme Court. I mean, it does. I think it does have a Supreme Court because they issued an arrest for Benjamin Netanyahu, which is so funny because, like, I mean, we should, like, it's a complete slap in the face to international law. The fact that, you know, Netanyahu, after being issued a warrant for his arrest by a secular court, is going to be allowed to speak at Congress. It's disgusting. But he's certainly never gonna, I don't know, will Benjamin Netanyahu ever speak again at the United Nations? Because he's currently wanted by the UN, which is kind of funny as fuck. But yeah, the UN needs to have a standing army. Think of the UN as the US government and all the other nations within the UN as the states. Like America or USA could be like Georgia, and Russia could be like South Carolina, you know? And instead of individual states having their own army, the UN has an army. And the whole purpose of that, and you might ask yourself, well, hold up, if the UN is the only government that exists, what is the need for an army? And that's a good damn point. That's the point, actually. There is no need for an army. The reason the UN would have an army is to enforce its laws. Kind of like how the US government quelled it marched down south, you know, and quelled the fucking Confederate rebels. That's kind of like what the UN would do with its army. Any government, any state, any renegade state that tries to nullify international law will be met with UN troops. I mean, the UN needs forts, kind of like how the US has forts, or had forts. Like, think Civil War, you had Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, all these forts, and the purpose of these forts aren't really, they're not meant to be against enemies, to be against foreign enemies, because they're so far inland. You can make the argument that they were there originally built against the Indians. You can make that argument, but what they really were for, and this was really evidential in the 1860s, was they were there to enforce the Constitution against domestic enemies, i.e. the Confederate renegades who tried to nullify the Constitution. But that's what the UN needs to do. The UN needs to build forts all across the world. The UN needs to disband every army. Get rid of the Israeli army, get rid of the American army, get rid of every single army. The only army that should exist is the United Nations army. That's really all I gotta say. But I do see the UN currently as being very much comparable to the United States government in its early days, prior to 1789. It was a very pathetic and weak government. It had nothing, no army, no bank, nothing.